The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile conference room as Major Sarah Chen walked through the doors, her military-issued heels clicking against the polished floor. She had been summoned without explanation, without warning, and the faces staring back at her told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a routine briefing. This was an interrogation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Colonel Marcus Webb sat at the head of the table, his weathered hands folded, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Sarah with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. To his right sat Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, her expression unreadable, but her posture rigid with barely contained tension. 3 other officers flanked them, men Sarah recognized but had never worked closely with. The air was thick with suspicion, and Sarah could feel the weight of their collective gaze pressing down on her like a physical force. "Major Chen," Colonel Webb's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Please, have a seat." Sarah remained, standing for a moment, scanning the room, taking in every detail. The blinds were drawn. The door had been closed behind her with an audible click. No recording equipment was visible, but that didn't mean their conversation wouldn't be documented. In her 15 years of military service, she had learned to read the subtle signs of danger, and every instinct she possessed was screaming at her now. "Sir, may I ask what this is regarding?" Sarah's voice was steady, professional, betraying none of the anxiety that was building in her chest. "You may not," Webb replied curtly. "Sit down, Major." Sarah pulled out the chair across from Webb and sat, her back straight, her hands resting calmly on the table. She had been trained for this moment, though she had never expected it to come. Counterintelligence work was always a double-edged sword. You spent so much time looking for traitors that eventually, people started looking at you, Lieutenant. Colonel Hayes leaned forward, her voice softer than Webb's but no less menacing. "Major, how long have you been assigned to the Strategic Intelligence Division?" 3 years, 4 months, ma'am." "And in that time, how many classified operations have you had access to?" Sarah's mind raced. This was about more than routine security. Clearance review. They were building a case, laying groundwork for something bigger. "I would need to consult my records for an exact number, but I'd estimate approximately 230 classified briefings and operations." 230, Webb repeated slowly, as if savoring each word. "That's quite a lot of sensitive information for one person to handle." "It comes with the territory of my position, sir." One of the other officers, a man Sarah recognized as Major Tom Richardson from Internal Affairs, slid a manila folder across the table. "Major Chen, are you familiar with Operation Nightfall?" Sarah's blood ran cold. Operation Nightfall had been compromised 6 months ago. 3 American assets had been captured, 2 had been killed, and 1 had simply vanished. The operation had been so highly classified that fewer than a dozen people had known about it. She had been one of them. "Yes, sir. I was part of the planning committee." "And you were aware that Operation Nightfall was compromised?" "I was briefed on the security breach, yes." Richardson opened the folder, revealing photograph surveillance shots of Sarah entering and leaving various buildings around the city. Her apartment building, the grocery store, the small cafe where she met her sister for lunch every Tuesday. But there were other photos too, ones that made her stomach drop. Sarah meeting with a man she didn't recognize, captured from a distance with a telephoto lens. The timestamp showed it was from 3 weeks ago, but Sarah had no memory of the encounter. "Major Chen," Webb's voice had taken on a different tone now, colder, more accusatory. "Can you explain these photographs?" Sarah studied the images carefully. The man in the photos was middle-aged, wearing a dark coat, his face partially obscured by shadows. The location appeared to be a park she sometimes jogged through, but she couldn't remember ever stopping to speak with anyone there. Sir, I don't recognize this individual, and I don't recall this meeting taking place. You don't recall, Hayes repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. Major, these photographs were taken by an FBI surveillance team. Are you telling us that you met with an unknown individual and have no memory of it? The pieces were falling into place now, and Sarah realized the gravity of her situation. Someone had been feeding information to enemy agents, and she was being set up as the fall guy. The photographs were either doctored or showed someone who looked like her, but proving that would be nearly impossible with the technology available to whoever was framing her. Ma'am, I am telling you that I have never met with this individual. If these photographs show me, then they have been manipulated, or there is some other explanation. Webb leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Major Chen, we have reason to believe that you have been in contact with foreign intelligence operatives. We have evidence that suggests you may have been responsible for the compromise of Operation Nightfall. The accusation hung in the air, like a physical presence. Sarah felt the world shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in, suddenly called into question by people she had served alongside for years. Sir, I categorically deny any involvement in espionage activities. I have served my country faithfully for 15 years, and I would never, Major. Webb interrupted. Your denial is noted. However, the evidence suggests otherwise. You are hereby relieved of all duties, pending a full investigation by the Office of Special Investigations. As Sarah left the conference room that day, her badge and weapon confiscated, her security clearance suspended, she had no idea that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would transform her from accused traitor to the nation's most effective spy hunter. But first, she would have to survive long enough to prove her innocence. The walk from the conference room to the building's exit felt like the longest journey of Sarah's life. Every colleague she passed seemed to look at her differently, as if the accusation of treason was already written across her face. Word traveled fast in the intelligence community, and by the time she reached the parking garage, Sarah was certain that everyone in the building knew about her suspension. Sarah's world imploded in the span of a single sentence. 15 years of dedicated service, of sleepless nights protecting national security, of missing family gatherings and personal milestones, all of it reduced to a single moment of accusation. But even as shock coursed through her system, her analytical mind began working, dissecting the situation with the same precision she had once applied to enemy intelligence reports. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat in her car, not from fear, but from rage. Someone had orchestrated this perfectly, timing the accusations, preparing the evidence, ensuring that she would have no time to mount a defense. The photographs were too convenient, too professionally taken, too perfectly timed to be coincidental. Sarah drove home through the familiar streets of Northern Virginia, her mind already shifting from shock to analysis. If she was being framed, and she was certain she was, then someone with high-level access had planned this operation carefully. The list of people who could orchestrate such a deception was disturbingly short, and it included many of the same individuals who had access to Operation Nightfall. Her apartment felt different when she returned that evening. Every shadow seemed to hide a surveillance device. Every phone call could be monitored. Every email could be intercepted. She was a prisoner in her own life, trapped by accusations she couldn't prove false and evidence she couldn't explain. But Sarah Chen hadn't survived 15 years in military intelligence by giving up when things got difficult. She had built a career on finding patterns others missed, on seeing connections that weren't immediately obvious. If someone was framing her, they had made mistakes. They always did. She began with the photographs. Using her personal laptop, one she had purchased with her own money years ago for personal use. Never connected to military networks, she analyzed the images with the same scrutiny she would apply to enemy intelligence. The lighting was wrong, for the time of day indicated by the timestamp. The shadows fell at an angle that didn't match the position of the sun at that hour. Small details, but ones that a skilled analyst could use to prove manipulation. Next, she reviewed her own records. Every morning, she wrote brief notes about her activities, a habit she had developed during her early intelligence training. According to her notes, on the day the photographs were allegedly taken, she had been at the dentist during the time frame shown in the images. She had the appointment card, the payment receipt, and the dental records to prove it, but even as she gathered evidence of her innocence, Sarah realized that clearing her name was only part of the battle. The real traitor was still out there, still feeding information to enemy agents, still putting American lives at risk. And now, with her investigation launched, they would be even more careful, even more difficult to catch. Working late into the night, Sarah began building a profile of everyone who had access to Operation Nightfall, cross-referencing their backgrounds, their financial records, their travel patterns. It was the same process she had used to identify enemy agents, but now she was applying it to her own colleagues. The picture that emerged over the following days was disturbing. 3 of the 12 individuals with access to the operation had shown unusual financial activity in the months leading up to the compromise. 2 had made unexplained trips to cities with known foreign intelligence presence. 1 had recently purchased a new home worth significantly more than his military salary could support, but it was the 4th name on the list that made Sarah's blood run cold. Colonel Marcus Webb, the man who had led her interrogation, had been one of the original planners of Operation Nightfall. He had access to every detail, every timeline, every identity, and according to the financial records she was able to access through publicly available sources, he had been making cash deposits into a separate account, deposits that didn't correspond to his military pay schedule. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind processing the implications. Webb wasn't just investigating her, he was protecting himself. By making her the suspect, he was directing attention away from his own activities. It was a brilliant strategy, using the very system designed to catch traitors to protect the real traitor. The realization brought both clarity and terror. If Webb was the real traitor, then her situation was far more dangerous than she had initially understood. He wouldn't simply be content to destroy her career. He would need to ensure her permanent silence. As if summoned by her thoughts, Sarah's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like the others who knew too much." Sarah stared at the message, her blood turning to ice. The others who knew too much. The 3 assets from Operation Nightfall who had been captured. Maybe they hadn't been caught by enemy agents at all. Maybe they had been eliminated by someone who needed to cover their tracks, someone like Colonel Marcus Webb. The game had just become deadly serious, and Sarah realized she was no longer just fighting to clear her name. She was fighting for her life. The threatening message changed everything. What had begun as a fight to clear her name had transformed into a battle for survival. Sarah spent the next few hours methodically preparing for what she now understood was inevitable. Webb and his handlers would try to eliminate her before she could expose their operation. Sarah spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled paranoia, moving through her suspended routine while her mind worked overtime. Every trip to the grocery store was mapped out in advance. Every phone call was made from different locations. Every meeting was planned with counter-surveillance in mind. She had become a spy in her own life, and the irony wasn't lost on her. But Sarah's years of training had prepared her for exactly this type of crisis. She activated protocols she had hoped never to use: emergency communication methods, safe houses, and most importantly, allies who could help her navigate the dangerous waters ahead. On Thursday morning, she made her first real move toward building a case against Webb. Using a secure connection from a public library, she accessed the personnel files of everyone connected to Operation Nightfall through legitimate intelligence databases that hadn't yet been flagged for her suspension. What she found confirmed her worst fears and validated her growing suspicions about Colonel Webb. Webb had been divorced 2 years ago, a messy affair that had cost him nearly half his assets. His ex-wife had remarried a wealthy businessman, and Webb had been struggling financially ever since. But more importantly, Sarah discovered that Webb had been passed over for promotion to Brigadier General twice in the past 18 months. Professional humiliation. That could drive a man to desperate measures. The financial records painted an even clearer picture. Webb had been making regular deposits of exactly $5,000 into an offshore account, always in cash, always on the 15th of each month. The deposits had started 6 months before Operation Nightfall was compromised, and they had continued even after the operation failed. Someone was paying Webb regularly, and they were paying him well. But Sarah needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed proof that would stand up in a court-martial, evidence that would not only clear her name, but expose the real traitor. And for that, she would need help from someone she could trust completely. Lieutenant James Morrison had been Sarah's partner on dozens of intelligence operations over the past 2 years. They had worked together in hostile territories, developed sources behind enemy lines, and saved each other's lives more than once. If anyone would believe her story and risk their career to help her, it would be Morrison. The challenge was making contact without alerting Webb's surveillance teams. Sarah had noticed the watchers. They were good, but not good enough to completely avoid detection by someone with her training. A black sedan had been following her for 2 days, always staying just far enough back to avoid obvious detection, but never letting her completely out of sight. Sarah used a technique she had learned during covert operations training, a communication method that appeared completely innocent but carried a coded message. She ordered flowers to be delivered to Morrison's apartment with a card that read, "Thanks for the book recommendation." The author's technique in Chapter 15 was particularly interesting. It was a simple code they had developed during a mission in Eastern Europe. Chapter 15 meant a meeting in 15 hours at a predetermined location, an old training facility they had used for exercises, abandoned but still accessible to personnel with the right clearances. 15 hours later, Sarah arrived at the facility using counter-surveillance techniques that would have impressed her former instructors. She hot-wired a motorcycle 3 blocks from the meeting site, took a circuitous route through industrial areas where surveillance would be difficult, and approached the building on foot through drainage tunnels that connected to the facility's basement. Morrison was already there when she emerged from the tunnel access, standing in the shadows of what had once been a mock interrogation room. He looked nervous but determined, constantly scanning the area for signs of surveillance. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" Morrison's voice was tight with concern. "The whole division is buzzing about your investigation. They're saying you sold out Operation Nightfall." "Jim, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Sarah said, moving deeper into the shadows of the abandoned facility. "I'm being framed. Someone is using me as a scapegoat to cover their own crimes, and that someone is Colonel Webb." Morrison studied her face in the dim light filtering through broken windows, searching for signs of deception or paranoia. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "I've known you for 2 years, Sarah. You're a lot of things, but a traitor isn't one of them. What do you need?" The relief Sarah felt at having an ally was overwhelming. "I need access to Webb's communications. Phone records, emails, anything that might show contact with foreign agents. And I need it without triggering any security alerts that might warn him we're investigating." "That's a tall order. Webb has high-level clearances and powerful friends. If we're caught investigating him without authorization, if we don't investigate him, more people are going to die," Sarah interrupted. "Jim, I think Webb didn't just compromise Operation Nightfall. I think he had the assets killed to cover his tracks." Morrison's expression darkened as the implications sank in. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about a conspiracy that goes beyond simple espionage. Webb is working with foreign handlers, and they've made it clear that they're willing to kill to protect their operation. Over the next hour, Sarah laid out her evidence piece by piece. The inconsistencies in the photographs, the financial records, the timeline of events, and most importantly, the threatening message she had received. Morrison listened intently, asking pointed questions, challenging her assumptions. By the end, he was convinced. "Okay, I'm in," he said finally. "But we have to be smart about this. Webb is already suspicious of you, and if he finds out I'm helping, we'll both be facing treason charges." As they prepared to leave the abandoned facility, Sarah felt a sense of cautious optimism for the first time since her ordeal began. She was no longer alone in her fight against Webb's conspiracy. But she also knew that involving Morrison had raised the stakes. Now she was responsible not just for her own survival, but for protecting her friend from the consequences of helping her. The real investigation was about to begin, and Sarah was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The abandoned training facility had served its purpose as a secure meeting ground, but Sarah knew that she and Morrison couldn't continue to use it without eventually being discovered. As they parted ways that night, Sarah returned to her apartment. With a new sense of urgency, time was running out, and Webb's surveillance teams were closing in. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she packed her emergency go bag. In her years of intelligence work, she had learned that preparation was the difference between life and death. The bag contained everything she needed to disappear for 72 hours. Cash, fake identification documents she had created during a training exercise years ago, burner phones, and a .38 revolver that wasn't registered to her real name. Threatening message on her laptop screen seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like the others who knew too much." The implication was clear. She wasn't the first person to discover Webb's activities, and the previous discoverers were no longer around to tell their stories. Sarah's mind raced through the timeline of Operation Nightfall. 3 assets had been captured, 2 killed, 1 vanished. But what if they hadn't been caught by enemy agents? What if they had been eliminated by someone who needed to silence them? The thought made her stomach turn, but it also clarified her situation. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore, it was about staying alive. She moved to the window again, studying the surveillance team below. 3 cars, at least 6 operatives, probably more she couldn't see. They were positioned professionally, covering all exits from her building. But they had made one crucial mistake, they were thinking. Like law enforcement, not like soldiers. They had positioned themselves to catch someone trying to escape, not someone trying to fight back. Sarah activated her burner phone and sent a coded message to Morrison. "The package is compromised. Meeting at the alternate location in 2 hours." It was a simple message, but Morrison would understand. The alternate location was an abandoned warehouse they had used for training exercises, a place where they could speak without fear of surveillance. But first, she had to get out of her apartment building without being detected. Sarah had spent years studying counter-surveillance techniques, and she had learned that the best way to avoid detection was to give your watchers exactly what they expected to see. She changed into workout clothes, grabbed her gym bag, and headed for the building's fitness center. The gym was in the basement, with a service entrance that connected to the building's loading dock. Most surveillance teams focused on the main entrances, assuming that their target would use the most obvious escape routes. The gym was empty at this hour, just as Sarah had expected. She made her way to the equipment room, where she knew there was a service ladder that led to the loading dock. The maintenance entrance was secured with a simple lock that took her less than 30 seconds to pick. Sarah emerged into the alley behind her building, moving quickly but calmly toward the street. The surveillance team would be watching the front entrance, waiting for her to appear. It would be at least 20 minutes before they realized she was gone. And by then, she would be long gone. She hot-wired a motorcycle parked 3 blocks away, a skill she had learned during a covert operations training course in Eastern Europe. The bike roared to life, and Sarah disappeared into the city traffic, taking a circuitous route to the warehouse where Morrison would be waiting. The warehouse district was deserted at this hour, a maze of empty buildings and darkened streets. Sarah parked the stolen motorcycle 2 blocks away and approached the meeting point on foot, using every shadow and doorway to conceal her movement. Her training had taught her to assume that any meeting could be a trap, even with trusted allies. Morrison was already there when she arrived, standing in the shadows near the loading dock. He looked nervous, constantly scanning the area for signs of surveillance. When he saw Sarah, relief washed over his face. "Jesus, Sarah, I was starting to think they had grabbed you. The whole base is buzzing about your disappearance." They're watching my apartment," Sarah said, keeping her voice low. "Someone sent me a message tonight, threatening me if I didn't stop investigating." Morrison's expression darkened. "This is getting out of hand. Maybe we should take this to internal affairs, let them handle it." "Aya is compromised," Sarah replied. "Richardson was in that meeting today. He's either working with Webb or he's been fed false information. We can't trust anyone in the official chain of command." "Then what do you want to do?" Sarah pulled out a manila folder containing the evidence she had gathered. "I want to end this, tonight. I've been thinking about those 3 assets from Operation Nightfall. What if they weren't captured by enemy agents? What if they were eliminated because they discovered what Webb was doing?" Morrison studied the documents, his expression growing more grim with each page. "These financial records. Sarah, if this is accurate, Webb has been taking payments for over a year." "But payments for what?" "Information, access, maybe even the locations of our assets overseas." Sarah's voice was tight with anger. "Jim, I think Webb has been selling our people to the highest bidder. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story." The warehouse suddenly felt colder, as if the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Morrison stared at the documents, processing the implications. "If you're right, then Operation Nightfall wasn't just compromised, it was sabotaged from the inside. Those assets died because Webb sold them out. And now he's trying to pin it on me to cover his tracks." Sarah took back the folder, her jaw set with determination. "But I have a plan. Webb thinks he's won, that he's successfully framed me and can go back to business as usual. But he's made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" "He thinks I'm going to run. He thinks I'm going to disappear and let him destroy my reputation while he continues his treachery. But I'm not running, Jim. I'm going hunting." Morrison looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Sarah, what are you planning?" "Webb is meeting with his handler tomorrow night. I've been tracking his movement patterns, and he has a standing appointment every month at the same location. A parking garage downtown, level 3, northwest corner. He thinks he's being careful, but he's gotten complacent." "You want to surveil the meeting?" "I want to do more than that. I want to record it, document it, and gather enough evidence to bury Webb and whoever he's working with." Sarah's eyes were hard with resolve. "This ends tomorrow night, one way or another." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks. Finally he nodded. "Okay, I'm in. But we do this smart. Professional surveillance, multiple angles. Backup plans. If this goes wrong, we're both dead. If we don't do this, more people will die. Webb is still out there, still selling information, still putting American lives at risk. I can't live with that." As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. For the first time since this nightmare began, she was taking control of the situation. Tomorrow night, she would prove her innocence and expose the real traitor. Or she would die trying. The game was about to reach its climax. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah spent the morning in a safe house, a small apartment she had rented under a false name months ago. As a contingency plan, she had learned long ago that intelligence operatives needed escape routes, places where they could disappear if operations went wrong. She had never expected to need it to hide from her own government. The safe house gave her time to process everything that had happened since Morrison had agreed to help her. Having an ally changed the dynamics of her situation, but it also increased the risk to both of them. Webb's surveillance teams would eventually notice Morrison's absence from routine activities, and when they did, they would start asking questions. Morrison arrived at noon with surveillance equipment and a detailed floor plan of the parking garage. He had also brought disturbing news from the base. "They've issued a bolo for you," he said, spreading the equipment across the small kitchen table. "Be on the lookout. They're calling you a flight risk and potentially dangerous." Sarah examined the surveillance gear: high-definition cameras, directional microphones, recording devices small enough to hide in a matchbox. Dangerous to whom? To Webb and his operation? The official story is that you've had a psychological break, that the stress of the investigation has caused you to become unstable. They're painting you as a rogue agent who might lash out at innocent people. Innocent people, Sarah repeated bitterly. Webb has blood on his hands, and they're calling him innocent. Morrison pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It showed Colonel Webb entering a nondescript office building downtown. "I followed him this morning. He went to this building, stayed for 2 hours, then returned to base. The building houses several businesses, but the one that caught my attention was Meridian Consulting." Sarah studied the photograph, her mind working through the implications. Meridian Consulting. I've heard that name before, but I can't place it. They're supposedly a private intelligence firm, but their client list is classified. The kind of company that works with foreign governments, corporations, anyone willing to pay their fees. Morrison's voice was grim. If Webb is working with them, then this goes far beyond simple espionage. We're talking about a sophisticated intelligence operation, which means Webb isn't the top of the food chain. He's just a cog in a larger machine. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Jim, what if this conspiracy goes higher than we thought? What if Webb is just the inside man for a larger operation? Then we're in even more danger than we realized. But it also means that exposing Webb might give us leverage to uncover the entire network. They spent the afternoon preparing for the evening's surveillance operation. Sarah studied the parking garage blueprints, identifying sightlines, escape routes, and potential hiding spots. The garage was a perfect location for a clandestine meeting, multiple levels, limited security cameras, and easy access to the street. Morrison tested the recording equipment, ensuring that every device was functioning properly. We'll have audio and video coverage from 3 different angles. Even if Webb's people spot one camera, the others will keep recording. As evening approached, the warehouse district was exactly as Sarah remembered from her previous reconnaissance: deserted, with a maze of empty buildings and darkened streets. The meeting with Morrison would be crucial. They needed to finalize their plan to gather evidence against Webb, while avoiding detection by his surveillance teams. Sarah arrived at the warehouse, using the same counter-surveillance techniques that had served her well at the training facility. She parked the stolen motorcycle 2 blocks away and approached the meeting point on foot, using every shadow and doorway to conceal her movement. Her training had taught her to assume that any meeting could be a trap, even with trusted allies. At 9:47 p.m., Colonel Webb's silver sedan pulled into the garage. Sarah watched through her binoculars as he parked in the designated spot, then sat in his car for several minutes, presumably scanning for surveillance. Professional paranoia, the kind that kept operatives alive in hostile territory. At 9:52 p.m., a black Mercedes with diplomatic plates entered the garage. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she recognized the implications. Diplomatic plates meant foreign government involvement, which transformed this from a simple case of military corruption into a full-scale espionage operation. The Mercedes parked 2 spaces away from Webb's sedan. A man in an expensive suit emerged. From the passenger side, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Sarah activated her camera, capturing high-resolution images of the meeting. Webb exited his vehicle and approached the Mercedes. The conversation was brief, professional, almost businesslike. Webb handed over a manila envelope, received a briefcase in return. The entire exchange took less than 2 minutes, but as Webb turned to leave, the silver-haired man called out to him. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but she could see Webb's body language change. His shoulders tensed, his posture became defensive. The man was giving him new instructions, and Webb clearly didn't like what he was hearing. Sarah's directional microphone picked up fragments of the conversation. The woman is becoming a problem. Eliminate the threat. Make it look like an accident. The blood drained from Sarah's face as she realized what she was hearing. They weren't just planning to frame her, they were planning to kill her. Webb nodded reluctantly and returned to his car. The Mercedes pulled away first, followed by Webb's sedan. Sarah remained in position for another 10 minutes, ensuring that neither vehicle returned, then made her way to the rendezvous point where Morrison was waiting. "Did you get it?" Morrison asked urgently. Every word, every image. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Jim, they're not just planning to destroy my career. They're planning to kill me." Morrison's face went pale. "We need to get this evidence to someone we can trust, someone with the authority to act on it. Who? Internal Affairs is compromised. The FBI might be involved. For all we know, this conspiracy reaches into the highest levels of government. Then we go public. Media, Congress, whistleblower protection programs." Sarah shook her head. "By the time we navigate the bureaucracy, I'll be dead. They're not going to wait for due process, Jim. They're going to move fast." "Then what do you want to do?" Sarah looked at the recording equipment, then at Morrison's concerned face. "I want to set a trap. Webb thinks he's hunting me, but I'm going to turn the tables. When he comes for me, I'll be ready." The hunter was about to become the hunted. Sarah spent the next morning transforming her safe house into a fortress. She had learned urban warfare tactics during her deployment in Eastern Europe, and she applied those lessons now with methodical precision. Every window was reinforced, every entrance was booby-trapped with improvised alarms, and every room offered multiple escape routes. Morrison arrived at dawn with additional equipment and troubling news. "They've upgraded the manhunt. FBI, local police, even some private contractors. They're calling you a terrorist threat." "A terrorist threat?" Sarah's voice was incredulous. "They're really pulling out all the stops to discredit me. It gets worse. They're saying you've made threats against high-ranking military officials. They have a recording of someone with your voice making specific threats against Colonel Webb." Sarah's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I never made any threats. It's a deepfake. Voice synthesis technology has gotten sophisticated enough that they can make you say anything they want. The recording sounds exactly like you, and it's convincing enough to fool voice recognition software." The implications were staggering. Webb's handlers weren't just framing her for espionage, they were creating evidence to justify killing her. When her body was found, the official story would be that she was a dangerous terrorist who had been eliminated while resisting arrest. "Jim, we're running out of time. They're not going to wait much longer to make their move." Morrison pulled out a tablet and showed her a satellite image of the safe house. "I've been monitoring police frequencies. They don't know your location yet, but they're conducting a systematic search of the area. They'll find you within 12 hours. Then we end this tonight. I'm going to force Webb to come to me, on my terms, in a place where I control the variables. Sarah, that's suicide. Webb won't come alone, and his handlers have resources we can't match. Not if I give them something they want more than my death. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began typing rapidly. I'm going to send Webb a message. I'm going to tell him that I have evidence of his espionage activities, and I'm willing to trade it for safe passage out of the country. Morrison stared at her in disbelief. You're going to pretend to be a traitor? I'm going to make him think. I'm desperate enough to run. Webb's psychology profile shows that he's arrogant, overconfident. He'll want to handle this personally, to tie up loose ends himself. Sarah composed the message carefully, using language that would appeal to Webb's ego while suggesting that she was broken and defeated. She claimed to have evidence that would expose not just Webb, but his entire network, and she was willing to trade it for a new identity and safe passage to a non-extradition country. The meeting location she proposed was perfect for her purposes, an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. She had used the facility for training exercises and knew every inch of the terrain. More importantly, it was isolated enough that Webb would feel secure bringing a small team, but complex enough that Sarah could use the environment to her advantage. Morrison helped her prepare the site, positioning cameras and recording equipment throughout the complex. If something went wrong, if Sarah didn't survive the encounter, the evidence would automatically upload to multiple secure servers and be transmitted to journalists and congressional investigators. Are you sure about this? Morrison asked as they finished their preparations. I'm sure that I won't let Webb destroy more lives. I'm sure that I won't let him sell out more American assets. And I'm sure that I won't let him frame me for crimes I didn't commit. As evening approached, Sarah received a response to her message. Webb had agreed to the meeting, but he was bringing backup. The message was brief and professional, but Sarah could sense the underlying tension. Webb was suspicious, but he was also desperate to recover the evidence that could destroy him. Sarah positioned herself in the main warehouse, using shipping containers and industrial equipment to create a maze of cover and concealment. She had multiple escape routes planned, but she was hoping she wouldn't need them. If everything went according to plan, Webb would incriminate himself on camera, and she would finally have the proof she needed to clear her name. At 10:30 p.m., the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the industrial complex. Sarah counted at least 3 cars, possibly more. Through her night vision scope, she could see armed figures moving through the shadows, taking positions around. The warehouse. Webb entered the building alone, as she had expected. His arrogance wouldn't allow him to appear weak in front of his subordinates. He was carrying a briefcase, presumably containing the payment he thought Sarah would accept for her silence. Major Chen, Webb's voice echoed in the empty warehouse. I'm here, as requested. Where is the evidence you claim to have? Sarah stepped out from behind a shipping container, her hands visible and empty. Colonel Webb, I was wondering when you'd show up. You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Major, but I'm prepared to offer you a generous settlement. New identity, new life, enough money to disappear forever. In exchange for my silence about your espionage activities. Webb's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about Operation Nightfall. I'm talking about the 3 assets you sold out to enemy agents. I'm talking about the regular payments you've been receiving from foreign intelligence services. Webb's hand moved slowly toward his weapon. You're delusional, Major. The stress of the investigation has clearly affected your judgment. I have recordings, Webb, audio and video evidence of your meetings with foreign agents. I know about Meridian Consulting, and I know about your plans to eliminate me. The mask finally slipped. Webb's professional composure cracked, and Sarah saw the cold calculation beneath. You should have taken the money and run, Major. Now you've forced me to handle this the hard way. Webb raised his weapon, but Sarah was already moving, diving behind a concrete pillar as the warehouse erupted in gunfire. The trap was sprung, and the final confrontation had begun. The truth was about to come out, one way or another. Following their successful recording of Webb's clandestine meeting, Sarah and Morrison had retreated to analyze the evidence they had gathered. The audio and video recordings were damning clear proof of Webb's treasonous activities and his handlers' plans to eliminate Sarah. But as they prepared to take action on this intelligence, the situation escalated beyond anything they had anticipated. Warehouse exploded into chaos as Webb's backup team stormed through multiple entrances simultaneously. Sarah had expected this after the parking garage surveillance operation. Webb would be paranoid about any location where he might be vulnerable. He was too experienced to come alone to what he surely suspected was a trap. But she had prepared for exactly this scenario, turning the industrial complex into a three-dimensional battlefield where her knowledge of the terrain gave her a crucial advantage. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as automatic weapons fire echoed off the concrete walls. Sarah moved like a ghost through the maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment, using every shadow and blind spot to stay ahead of her pursuers. She could hear Webb shouting orders to his team, his voice tight with frustration and anger. "Find her. She's somewhere in the northeast section. Watch your crossfire. I want her alive if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks." Sarah smiled grimly as she heard the qualification in Webb's orders. He still wanted to interrogate her, to find out exactly what evidence she had and who else might know about his activities. That desperation would work in her favor. It would make his team cautious when they should be aggressive. She activated a small device attached to her belt, and suddenly the warehouse was filled with the sound of pre-recorded gunfire and explosions coming from speakers she had positioned throughout the complex. The acoustic confusion would mask her real position while making Webb's team think they were under fire from multiple directions. Moving swiftly through a service corridor she had identified during her reconnaissance, Sarah made her way to an elevated platform that overlooked the main warehouse floor. From this vantage point, she could see Webb's entire Team 6 operatives in tactical gear, moving in coordinated pairs through the maze below. But what caught her attention was the man giving hand signals to the team leaders. Not Webb, someone else, someone she recognized from the surveillance photographs. It was the silver-haired man from the parking garage meeting, the foreign agent who had been giving Webb his orders. Sarah activated her recording equipment, capturing high-definition video of the foreign operative directing the American military personnel in what was essentially an assassination attempt on U.S. soil. The irony was perfect. Webb's handlers had provided her with exactly the evidence she needed to prove the scope of the conspiracy. Through her earpiece, she could hear Morrison's voice providing updates from his overwatch position outside the complex. "Sarah, you've got 2 more vehicles approaching from the south. This is getting out of hand. We need to extract you now." "Not yet," Sarah whispered back. "I need Webb to incriminate himself on camera. This is our only chance to get the full confession." She moved to a new position, using a series of catwalks and maintenance ladders to stay above the search teams. The foreign operative was becoming increasingly agitated, barking orders in accented English and checking his watch repeatedly. Whatever timeline they were operating under, Sarah's resistance was disrupting their plans. Webb appeared below her position, his weapon drawn, his face twisted with rage. He was no longer the composed colonel who had conducted her interrogation. He was a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. "Major Chen," Webb's voice boomed through the warehouse. "I know you can hear me. Let's end this professionally. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and I'll make sure your death is quick." Sarah activated a small speaker system she had positioned near Webb's location. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls with supernatural resonance. "Surrender? Like the assets from Operation Nightfall surrendered? Tell me, Webb, did they know you were the one who sold them out, or did they die thinking they had been betrayed by enemy agents?" Webb spun around, trying to locate the source of her voice. Those assets died because they were careless, because they didn't follow proper security protocols. They died because you gave their locations to foreign intelligence services in exchange for money. How much were American lives worth, Webb? What was your going rate for betraying your own people? The foreign operative moved closer to Webb, hissing something in his ear. Sarah could see the man's agitation growing. This confrontation was taking too long, drawing too much attention, creating too many variables they couldn't control. I did what I had to do, Webb's voice cracked with emotion. You have no idea what it's like to be passed over, to watch lesser officers get promoted while you're stuck in the same rank for years. The military doesn't appreciate loyalty, it only rewards politics and connections. So you decided to sell out to the highest bidder? You decided that your wounded pride was worth more than American lives? I decided to take what I was owed. I've served this country for 25 years. And what do I have to show for it? A pension that won't cover my ex-wife's alimony payments, and a promotion board that thinks I'm too old and too set in my ways. Sarah's recording equipment captured every word, every admission of guilt. But she needed more. She needed Webb to identify his handlers, to reveal the full scope of the conspiracy. And your friends? The ones paying your bills? Do they appreciate your loyalty? Or are you just another expendable asset to them? The foreign operative stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. In heavily accented English, he addressed Webb directly. This has gone on long enough. Kill her now, or my government will find someone else who can follow simple orders. Sarah's heart raced as she captured the admission on camera. Foreign government involvement, direct threats against American citizens on U.S. soil, and Webb's cooperation with enemy agents. It was everything she needed to prove the conspiracy. But her position had been compromised. One of the search teams had spotted the camera flash from her recording equipment, and they were moving toward her location with military precision. "Morrison, I've got what we need," she whispered into her earpiece. "Initiate extraction protocol." "Copy that." "Stay alive for 30 more seconds." Sarah prepared to move, but a new voice echoed through the warehouse, amplified by a bullhorn and carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. "This is FBI Agent Jennifer Walsh. The building is surrounded. All personnel inside, drop your weapons and exit with your hands visible." The cavalry had arrived, but Sarah wasn't sure if they were there to rescue her or arrest her. The warehouse fell silent except for the echo of Agent Walsh's voice reverberating off the concrete walls. Sarah remained frozen in her elevated position, watching as Webb's team below began to react to this unexpected development. The foreign operative grabbed Webb's arm, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Russian, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of federal intervention. "This is not what we agreed to," the man hissed. "You said you could handle this quietly." "I can still handle it," Webb replied, but his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. "We just need to adjust our approach." Through her earpiece, Sarah heard Morrison's urgent whisper. "Sarah, the FBI response is legitimate, but I don't know if they're here to help or arrest you. I've been monitoring their communications, and they have orders to bring you in dead or alive." The situation had become a three-way standoff. Webb's team was trapped between Sarah above and the FBI below. The federal agents outside were operating under potentially false information about Sarah's threat level. And Sarah herself was caught in the middle, with evidence that could clear her name but no way to safely deliver it to trustworthy authorities. "Agent," Walsh's voice boomed again. "Mr. Webb, we know you're in there. We also know about your financial irregularities and your unauthorized meetings. Come out peacefully, and we can discuss a deal." Sarah's blood ran cold. The FBI wasn't just here for her. They had been investigating Webb independently. But how much did they know, and more importantly, whose side were they really on? Webb's reaction answered her question immediately. His face went white with panic, and he began gesturing frantically to his team. "They don't know anything. It's a bluff, a fishing expedition. We stick to the plan, eliminate Chen, and disappear before they can develop real evidence." The foreign operative shook his head violently. "The operation is compromised. We extract now, liquidate all assets, and activate contingency protocols." "I'm not leaving without finishing this," Webb snarled. "Chen has recordings, evidence that could destroy everything. If she reaches the FBI alive, we're all dead." Sarah realized that the federal intervention, rather than saving her, had actually made the situation more desperate. Webb was now cornered, with no escape route except through her. He would fight with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. She activated her communication device and broadcast on a frequency she knew the FBI would be monitoring. "Agent Walsh, this is Major Sarah Chen. I am inside the warehouse, and I have evidence of a foreign espionage operation. Colonel Webb is working with enemy agents, and they are planning to eliminate American assets." The response came immediately. "Major Chen, you are wanted in connection with the compromise of classified operations. Surrender yourself immediately for questioning." "Agent Walsh, I am not the traitor. I have audio and video recordings that prove Colonel Webb has been selling intelligence to foreign governments. The real threat is inside this building with me." A long pause then. "Major, if you have evidence, come out slowly with your hands visible. We will provide protective custody while we review your materials." Sarah wanted to trust the FBI, but years of intelligence training had taught her to be suspicious of anyone claiming to offer help. How could she be sure that Agent Walsh wasn't compromised? How could she know that the federal response wasn't part of the conspiracy to silence her? Her dilemma was resolved when Webb's team suddenly opened fire on the FBI positions outside. The sound of automatic weapons echoed through the warehouse as bullets shattered windows and sparked off concrete barriers. Webb was making his choice. He would shoot his way out rather than face federal investigation. The FBI response was immediate and overwhelming. Tactical teams stormed the building from multiple entrances, using flashbang grenades and coordinated assault tactics. Sarah pressed herself against the concrete floor of her elevated position as the warehouse became a war zone. In the chaos below, she could see Webb and the foreign operative trying to escape through a rear exit. They were abandoning the rest of their team, leaving them to face federal agents while they fled. It was the final proof of Webb's character. When facing consequences for his actions, he would sacrifice anyone to save himself. Sarah made a split-second decision. She couldn't let Webb escape with the knowledge of ongoing operations and the identities of other potential assets. She activated her recording equipment one final time and dropped down from her position, using the firefight as cover to pursue the fleeing conspirators. The rear section of the warehouse was a maze of storage rooms and mechanical spaces. Sarah could hear Webb and his handler moving ahead of her, their voices echoing off the narrow corridors. She followed cautiously, her weapon drawn, knowing that this would likely be her last chance to capture them. She found them in a loading bay where a black SUV was waiting with its engine running. The foreign operative was already climbing into the passenger seat while Webb covered their retreat. As Sarah watched, Webb pulled out a device that looked like a detonator. "Insurance policy," he called out, apparently sensing her presence. "Explosive charges throughout the building. If I don't make it out alive, everyone dies together." Sarah's mind raced. The warehouse was filled with FBI agents, and innocent people would die if Webb triggered the explosives. But if she let him escape, he would disappear forever, taking his secrets and his foreign contacts with him. "It's over, Webb," she called out. "The FBI has the building surrounded. Your foreign friends are already cutting their losses. You're expendable to them." "Maybe," Webb replied, "but I'm taking you with me." He raised the detonator, his finger poised over the trigger. Sarah had seconds to act before the warehouse became a tomb for everyone inside. In that moment, she made the choice that would define the rest of her life. Time seemed to slow as Sarah assessed her options. Webb stood 20 feet away, his finger hovering over the detonator that could kill dozens of federal agents and destroy the evidence she had risked everything to gather. The foreign operative was shouting from the SUV, urging Webb to trigger the explosives and escape in the chaos that would follow. Sarah's training kicked in, her mind calculating angles, distances, and probabilities with mechanical precision. She had one shot, literally one opportunity, to prevent a catastrophe. If she missed, if she hesitated even for a fraction of a second, innocent people would die and the conspiracy would remain hidden forever. But then she noticed something that changed everything. Webb's hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from something else, a slight tremor that spoke of medical issues, stress, or substance abuse. His finger wasn't steady on the detonator, and his eyes kept darting between Sarah and the escape vehicle behind him. "You know they'll kill you anyway, don't you?" Sarah called out, taking a careful step forward. "Once you're no longer useful, once you've outlived your purpose, your foreign friends will eliminate you just like they eliminated the assets from Operation Nightfall." "Shut up." Webb's voice cracked with desperation. "You don't know anything about the pressure I've been under, the impossible choices I've had to make. I know you had a choice between serving your country and serving yourself. I know you chose money over honor, personal gain over the lives of your fellow soldiers." Sarah took another step, closing the distance between them. She could see sweat beading on Webb's forehead, could hear the labored breathing that indicated he was on the edge of panic. The detonator was connected to his belt by a short cable. If she could get close enough, she might be able to disable it without triggering the explosives. The foreign operative stepped out of the SUV, his own weapon drawn. "Webb, we leave now, or we die here. Make your choice." "I can't let her live," Webb replied, his voice hollow with desperation. "She knows too much. If she reaches the FBI with her evidence, then kill her and be done with it. But do it quickly, we have minutes, before this entire operation is compromised beyond recovery." Sarah could hear the FBI tactical teams moving through the warehouse behind her, clearing rooms and securing the building. They would reach the loading bay soon, but not soon enough to prevent Webb from triggering the explosives. She had to act. "Now, Webb, look at yourself," she said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "Look at what you've become. You were once an officer who swore an oath to defend this country. Now you're taking orders from foreign agents and planning to murder federal law enforcement officers. I was protecting myself." Webb's composure finally shattered completely. "You have no idea what it's like to watch your career stagnate while incompetent officers get promoted around you. You don't understand the financial pressure, the humiliation of being passed over again and again. So you decided to sell out your country? You decided that your wounded pride was worth more than American lives? I decided to take control of my own destiny. I decided to stop being a victim of a system that doesn't reward merit or loyalty." As Webb spoke, Sarah noticed that his attention was focused entirely on her, his anger and self-justification consuming his awareness of the tactical situation. The foreign operative was gesturing frantically from beside the SUV, but Webb was no longer listening to him. Sarah saw her opportunity. In one fluid motion, she dove forward and to the side, using a concrete pillar as cover while simultaneously drawing her weapon. Webb's finger tightened on the detonator, but his reflexes were a fraction of a second too slow. Sarah's shot was perfect, a precise hit to Webb's wrist that sent the detonator flying across the loading bay. Webb screamed in pain and rage, clutching his wounded hand while the device skittered harmlessly across the concrete floor. The foreign operative immediately opened fire, but Sarah was already moving, using her knowledge of the building layout to stay ahead of his shots. She could hear FBI agents responding to the gunfire, their tactical boots echoing through the corridors as they converged on the loading bay. Webb tried to reach the fallen detonator with his uninjured hand, but Sarah was faster. She kicked the device away and trained her weapon on him, her voice carrying the authority of 15 years of military service. "It's over, Webb. Your foreign handler is already running, and the FBI has enough evidence to convict you 10 times over. Surrender now, and maybe you can make a deal." Webb looked at her with pure hatred, blood streaming from his wounded wrist. "You have no idea what you've done. This conspiracy goes higher than you can imagine. Eliminating me won't stop anything. It will just make the people above me more careful. Then help me stop them. Give me names, locations, operational details. Help me save the lives you've put at risk." For a moment, Webb seemed to consider her offer. But then his expression hardened again, and Sarah realized that his pride would never allow him to admit the full extent of his crimes. "Agent Walsh loading." "Bay," Sarah called out as FBI tactical teams approached their position. "Suspect is wounded and contained. I have evidence of foreign espionage operations." Webb laughed bitterly as federal agents surrounded him. "Evidence? You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people are involved. Arresting me is like pulling one card from a house of cards. The whole structure will just reorganize itself around the gap." As the FBI took Webb into custody, Sarah realized that her nightmare was far from over. She had exposed one traitor, but according to Webb, he was just a small part of a much larger conspiracy. The real work was just beginning. In the months following the warehouse confrontation and Webb's arrest, Sarah found herself navigating a complex legal and bureaucratic maze. The evidence she had gathered was compelling, but the legal process moved slowly, and the full scope of Webb's conspiracy was still being unraveled by federal investigators. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., watching as the judge delivered the final sentence in what the media had dubbed the Nightfall Conspiracy. Colonel Marcus Webb, once a decorated military officer, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for espionage, treason, and the deaths of 5 American intelligence assets. But Webb's conviction was only the beginning. The evidence Sarah had gathered that night in the warehouse had unraveled a spy network that reached into the highest levels of government and the military. The foreign operative who had fled the scene identified as Viktor Petrov, a senior officer in Russian intelligence, had been captured 3 weeks later trying to cross the border into Mexico. Agent Jennifer Walsh approached Sarah as they left the courtroom. Over the past 6 months, Walsh had become both Sarah's advocate and her liaison with the ongoing federal investigation. "How does it feel?" Walsh asked. "Justice served, your name cleared, and a major espionage network dismantled?" Sarah looked back at the courthouse steps where media crews were broadcasting the verdict to the nation. "It feels like closure, but also like the beginning of something new. Webb was right about one thing. This conspiracy was bigger than any of us realized." The investigation had indeed revealed a sophisticated operation that had been running for over 5 years. Webb had been recruited initially through financial pressure, but the network had carefully cultivated other assets throughout the military and intelligence communities. 3 other officers had been arrested, and 2 civilian contractors had been charged with providing classified information to foreign agents. Morrison joined them on the courthouse steps, his face reflecting the exhaustion they all felt after months of testimony and investigation. He had been cleared of any wrongdoing and commended for his assistance in exposing the conspiracy. But the experience had changed him. "The preliminary damage assessment is complete," he said quietly. 12 operations compromised, 7 assets lost, and an estimated $50 million in intelligence value stolen. Webb and his network did more damage than we initially thought. Sarah nodded grimly. The human cost had been the most difficult part to accept. The 3 assets from Operation Nightfall hadn't died in enemy custody. They had been executed after Webb sold their locations to Russian intelligence. Their families had finally received closure, but justice for the dead could never truly balance the scales. "There's something else," Walsh continued. "The director wants to meet with you. There's been talk of a new position, heading up a counterintelligence unit specifically designed to prevent this kind of internal threat." Sarah had been expecting this conversation. Her experience in uncovering the Webb conspiracy had demonstrated the need for better internal security protocols, and her unique perspective as both hunter and hunted made her an ideal candidate to lead such an effort. "What kind of position?" "Deputy Director of Internal Threat Assessment. Your own team, significant resources, and the authority to investigate anyone with security clearance. Essentially, you'd be hunting for the next Marcus Webb before they can cause damage." Sarah considered the offer carefully. Part of her wanted to return to operational intelligence, to go back to the work she had been doing before her life had been turned upside down by false accusations. But she also understood that the Webb case had revealed fundamental weaknesses in the system, weaknesses that needed to be addressed by someone who understood them intimately. "I'll need to pick my own team," she said finally. "Already approved. Morrison has agreed to be your deputy, and you'll have access to the best analysts and investigators in the intelligence community." As they walked away from the courthouse, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been accused of treason, hunted by her own government, and facing the prospect of life in prison or death. Now she was being offered one of the most important positions in national security. The irony wasn't lost on her. By trying to frame her for espionage, Webb had inadvertently created the perfect person to prevent future espionage. Her experience as a suspect had given her insights into how investigations could be manipulated, how evidence could be fabricated, and how the system could be turned against innocent people. "One more thing," Walsh said as they reached their cars. "Webb has been talking to federal prosecutors. He's agreed to provide information about other potential threats in exchange for protection in federal prison. Apparently, the Russian network was larger than we discovered, and there may be other sleeper agents still in place." Sarah wasn't surprised. Webb's ego and his instinct for self-preservation would eventually overcome his resistance to cooperation. He would try to trade information for better treatment, and that information might help prevent future tragedies. "Set up a meeting," Sarah said. "I wanted to brief him personally." As she drove home that evening, Sarah thought about the assets who had died because of Webb's betrayal, the families who had been destroyed by his greed, and the colleagues who had trusted him with their lives. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten, and their deaths would serve as a reminder of the constant vigilance required to protect national security from internal threats. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Morrison, ready to start hunting traitors professionally. Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "I've been ready since the day they tried to frame me." The hunter had become the protector, and the system that had once threatened to destroy her would now be her weapon against those who would betray their country. Sarah Chen had gone from suspected spy to the nation's premier spy hunter, and she was ready to make sure that no one else would suffer the fate of the assets from Operation Nightfall. The real work was just beginning, but this time she would be the one asking the questions. The establishment of Sarah's new counterintelligence division had been a direct result of the lessons learned from the Webb conspiracy. The bureaucratic process of creating a new agency, recruiting personnel, and establishing operational protocols had taken nearly 2 years, but the results had exceeded everyone's expectations. 2 years after the Webb conspiracy trial, Sarah Chen's counterintelligence division had become the most feared and respected unit in American intelligence. Operating from a secure facility in Quantico, her team of 12 hand-picked investigators had already identified and neutralized 6 separate espionage operations, preventing what analysts estimated could have been billions of dollars in stolen intelligence and dozens of compromised assets. Sarah stood before a wall-mounted display showing a complex web of connections names, photos, financial records, and communication patterns that told the story of their latest investigation. This one was different from the others, more sophisticated, and more dangerous than anything they had encountered since the Webb network. "What are we looking at?" asked Morrison, who had proven to be an exceptional deputy director. His experience in the field, combined with his analytical skills, made him the perfect complement to Sarah's leadership style. "Operation Ghost Protocol," Sarah replied, pointing to a series of encrypted communications they had intercepted over the past 6 months. "Someone is recruiting assets inside the Pentagon, but they're using a completely different approach than Webb's handlers. Instead of financial pressure, they're using ideological manipulation." The investigation had begun when Sarah noticed an unusual pattern in classified document access logs. Several officers with high-level clearances had been accessing files outside their normal operational requirements, files that seemed unrelated to their assigned duties, but that collectively provided a comprehensive overview of American military capabilities in Eastern Europe. "Ideological manipulation, how?" Morrison asked, studying the display more carefully. "They're targeting officers who have become disillusioned with American foreign policy, people who believe that the military-industrial complex is perpetuating unnecessary conflicts. The recruiters present themselves as peace activists or whistleblower organizations, convincing their targets that they're serving a higher moral purpose by exposing military secrets." Sarah highlighted several names on the display. "Look at the profile similarities. All of them are decorated officers with spotless records. All of them have expressed private concerns about specific military operations. And all of them have been approached by what they believe are legitimate oversight organizations or journalistic outlets." The sophistication of the operation was remarkable. Instead of using traditional espionage techniques, the hostile intelligence service was exploiting the very values that made these officers excellent soldiers: their sense of duty, their moral compass, their desire to serve something greater than themselves. "How many assets do we think they've recruited?" Morrison asked. "At least 7 that we've identified, possibly more. The concerning part is the level of access these people have. Between them, they could provide a complete picture of NATO defensive strategies, troop deployment schedules, and weapons system capabilities." Sarah moved to another section of the display, showing financial records and communication intercepts. "The handlers are good, better than Webb's people were. They use multiple layers of cutouts, encrypted communications, and they never meet their assets in person. Everything is done through digital dead drops and secure messaging platforms." Morrison whistled low. "If they've been operating for 6 months without detection, how did we catch them?" "The same way we caught Webb. Someone got greedy." Sarah pointed to a series of financial transactions. One of the handlers made the mistake of using a bank account that was connected to a previous operation we'd investigated. The transaction triggered an automated alert in our monitoring system. "So what's our next move?" Sarah had been considering this question for weeks. Unlike the Webb case, where they had been able to gather evidence through direct surveillance, this operation required a more subtle approach. The assets believed they were serving a noble cause, and simply arresting them wouldn't reveal the full extent of the network or prevent similar operations in the future. "We're going to turn one of them," Sarah said. "We're going to approach one of the assets, explain what's really happening, and convince them to work with us to expose the entire network. That's incredibly risky. If our target refuses to cooperate, they'll warn the others and the whole operation will disappear. Which is why we need to choose our target very carefully." Sarah pointed to one of the names on the display. "Major Lisa Rodriguez, Army Corps of Engineers. She's been providing information about infrastructure vulnerabilities, but according to her psychological profile, She genuinely believes she's helping a congressional oversight committee identify weaknesses that need to be addressed. Morrison studied Rodriguez's file. Why her? Because she has a daughter serving in the Marines. When she finds out that the information she's been providing could be used to target American military installations where her own daughter might be stationed, she'll want to help us stop it. The plan was dangerous, but it was their best chance to unravel the entire operation without alerting the handlers. Sarah had learned from the Webb case that sometimes the most effective approach was to turn the enemy's own tactics against them. Over the next week, Sarah and Morrison carefully planned their approach to Major Rodriguez. They would need to provide enough evidence to convince her that she was being manipulated without revealing the full scope of their investigation. It was a delicate balance, too little information, and she might not believe them. Too much, and she might inadvertently compromise other aspects of the operation. The meeting was arranged through official channels, disguised as a routine security review. Rodriguez arrived at the Quantico facility on a Tuesday morning, expecting a standard briefing about new security protocols for military engineers. Instead, she found herself face to face with Sarah Chen, whose reputation in the intelligence community had grown considerably since the Webb conviction. "Major Rodriguez," Sarah began, "we need to discuss some communications you've been having with an organization calling itself the Congressional Military Oversight Foundation." Rodriguez's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about." "Major, you're not in trouble. In fact, we believe you're a victim of a sophisticated espionage operation. The organization you think you've been helping is actually a front for a hostile intelligence service." Sarah slid a folder across the table containing evidence of the real nature of Rodriguez's contacts. Financial records showing payments from foreign accounts, communication intercepts revealing the true identity of her handlers, and analysis showing how the information she had provided could be used to target American military assets. Rodriguez stared at the documents, her hands shaking as the implications became clear. They said they were investigating cost overruns and safety violations. They said Congress needed this information to protect soldiers. They lied to you, Major. They're using your patriotism and your genuine concern for military welfare to steal classified information that could be used to harm American forces overseas. The Major looked up at Sarah, tears in her eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "We want you to help us catch them," Sarah replied. "All of them." The Ghost Protocol investigation had been running for 3 months when Sarah and Morrison made the crucial decision to approach Major Rodriguez. The careful planning and psychological preparation that went into turning their first asset would prove to be the foundation for everything that followed. Major Rodriguez's cooperation proved to be the key that unlocked the entire Ghost Protocol operation. Over the following 3 months, she continued to provide information to her handlers while working closely with Sarah's team to document every aspect of the espionage network. The intelligence they gathered revealed an operation far more sophisticated and far-reaching than anyone had initially suspected. The hostile intelligence service identified as a joint Chinese-Russian operation codenamed Red Mirror had been running similar recruitment efforts in 7 different countries. Their approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of trying to turn existing intelligence officers or military personnel through traditional means like blackmail or financial pressure, they created fake oversight organizations and peace activist groups that appealed to their targets' genuine desire to serve their country better. "It's brilliant and terrifying at the same time," Morrison observed during one of their weekly briefings. "They're not creating traitors, they're creating true believers who think they're being patriotic." Sarah nodded as she reviewed the latest intelligence reports. "The psychological manipulation is incredibly sophisticated. They spend months profiling potential targets, understanding their personal motivations, their political views, their family situations. Then they craft an approach that makes the target feel like they're being recruited for something noble and necessary. The evidence Rodriguez had helped them gather painted a picture of an operation that had been running for over 2 years. The handlers had successfully recruited assets in the Pentagon, the State Department, the CIA, and even in the offices of several congressional committees. The scope of the intelligence theft was staggering. Everything from military deployment schedules to diplomatic negotiation strategies to advanced weapons research. But what made the operation particularly dangerous was its longevity. Unlike traditional espionage operations that sought to steal specific pieces of information quickly, Red Mirror was designed to provide a continuous stream of intelligence. Over many years, the assets genuinely believed in their missions, making them unlikely to develop the kind of guilt or paranoia that often led to the exposure of traditional spy networks. "How many total assets are we looking at?" Sarah asked. Her lead analyst, Dr. Rebecca Torres, a former CIA officer who specialized in counterintelligence psychology. Based on the communication patterns and financial flows Rodriguez has helped us map, we estimate between 20 and 30 active assets across the entire operation. But there could be more. The network is designed with multiple compartmentalized cells that don't necessarily know about each other. The challenge facing Sarah's team was unprecedented in counterintelligence work. They couldn't simply arrest the assets, because many of them were genuinely unaware that they were committing espionage. More importantly, arresting them without rolling up the entire network would simply cause the handlers to activate new assets and continue the operation elsewhere. Sarah made the decision to expand their approach. Instead of just using Rodriguez as a double agent, they would attempt to turn additional assets within the network, creating a web of cooperative witnesses who could help them understand the full scope of the operation. The second asset they approached was Colonel Michael Thompson, an Air Force logistics officer who had been providing information about supply chain vulnerabilities. Like Rodriguez, Thompson believed he was helping a legitimate government oversight organization identify problems that needed congressional attention. Thompson's reaction to learning the truth was immediate and visceral. "You're telling me that the information I provided about our supply routes in Afghanistan could be used to target American convoys?" "That's exactly what we're telling you, Colonel," Sarah replied. "The organization you've been working with is a front for foreign intelligence services. The security assessments you've been conducting are actually targeting packages for potential attacks on American forces." Thompson stared at the evidence Sarah had presented, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally determination. "What do you need me to do?" With Rodriguez and Thompson working as double agents, Sarah's team began to map the entire Red Mirror network. They identified handlers, communication methods, financial flows, and most importantly, the specific intelligence requirements that were driving the operation. The picture that emerged was sobering. Red Mirror wasn't just stealing current intelligence, they were positioning themselves to understand American military capabilities and decision-making processes for decades to come. The operation was designed to provide their sponsors with the kind of deep, systemic knowledge that would allow them to anticipate and counter American actions in any future conflict. "This is bigger than just espionage," Sarah told Morrison during a late-night strategy session. "This is strategic intelligence preparation for a potential future war. They're not just stealing our secrets, they're learning how we think, how we make decisions, how our entire military and diplomatic apparatus functions." Morrison nodded grimly. "Which means we can't just roll up the network and call it a victory. We need to understand what they've already learned and how they plan to use it." Sarah had been thinking about this problem for weeks. The traditional approach to counterintelligence, identify the spies, arrest them, and damage the operation, wouldn't be sufficient in this case. Red Mirror represented a new type of threat, one that required a new type of response. "We're going to feed them false information," she decided. We're going to use our turned assets to provide intelligence that looks valuable but actually serves our purposes. We're going to make them think they understand our capabilities when they actually understand only what we want them to understand. It was a dangerous game, one that would require months of careful planning and execution. Sarah would need to coordinate with multiple agencies, brief senior leadership on the operation, and manage the psychological stress on the assets who were now serving as double agents. But if successful, the operation wouldn't just neutralize Red Mirror, it would turn the enemy's own intelligence network into a weapon that could be used to protect American interests for years to come. The hunter had become the deceiver, and the greatest counterintelligence operation in American history was about to begin. The success of turning Rodriguez and Thompson had given Sarah's team the confidence to attempt their most ambitious operation, yet Operation Looking Glass, the systematic deception of an entire foreign intelligence network. The planning and coordination required had taken months, but the execution had been flawless. 18 months later, Sarah Chen stood in the Oval Office, delivering the final briefing on what had become known as Operation Looking Glass, the most successful counterintelligence deception in American history. The President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Director of National Intelligence listened intently as she explained how her team had turned the Red Mirror espionage network into an instrument of American strategic deception. The results exceeded our most optimistic projections, Sarah reported, referencing a classified document that detailed the operation's outcomes. Over the past year and a half, we used the Red Mirror network to feed carefully crafted intelligence to Chinese and Russian services. They now believe they have comprehensive knowledge of American military capabilities, when in fact they have a completely false picture that serves our strategic interests. The deception had been masterful in its complexity. Working with the Pentagon's Strategic Planning Division, Sarah's team had created an elaborate false narrative about American military weaknesses and deployment strategies. The enemy intelligence services, believing they were receiving authentic, stolen intelligence from their trusted assets, had incorporated this false information into their own strategic planning. Can you give us some specific examples? The President asked. Sarah nodded. We convinced them that our missile defense systems have significant vulnerabilities that don't actually exist, while concealing the real capabilities of our newest defensive technologies. We've made them believe that our Pacific Fleet operations are constrained by fuel logistics problems that we've actually solved. And most importantly, we've led them to completely misunderstand our rapid deployment capabilities. The psychological pressure on the double agents had been enormous, but Rodriguez, Thompson, and the 3 other assets they had successfully turned had performed their roles perfectly. They continued to meet with their handlers, continued to provide what appeared to be valuable intelligence, and maintained their covers as unwitting victims of foreign manipulation. Morrison, who had been promoted to Associate Director of Counterintelligence, added his own assessment. The foreign intelligence services are so confident in their penetration of our systems that they've actually reduced their other collection efforts against us. They think they're getting everything they need from Red Mirror, which has made it easier for us to detect and counter their remaining operations. But the success of Looking Glass had revealed an even more disturbing truth about the scale of foreign intelligence operations against the United States. Red Mirror wasn't an isolated network, it was part of a coordinated, multinational effort to penetrate American institutions that went far beyond anything they had previously imagined. What's our assessment of the broader threat? The Director of National Intelligence asked. Sarah consulted her briefing notes. We've identified at least 12 separate operations similar to Red Mirror, targeting different sectors of American society. Academic institutions, technology companies, financial services, media organizations, they're all being systematically penetrated using variations of the same ideological manipulation techniques. The scope of the challenge was staggering. The traditional model of counterintelligence, focused on protecting classified government information, was inadequate for defending against an adversary that was targeting the entire fabric of American society. Foreign intelligence services weren't just stealing secrets. They were trying to understand and influence every aspect of American decision-making, from corporate boardrooms to university research labs to newsroom editorial meetings. What do you recommend? The president asked. Sarah had been preparing for this question for months. We need to expand the counterintelligence mission beyond government agencies. We need to create partnerships with private sector organizations, academic institutions, and civil society groups that can help identify and counter foreign influence operations. And we need to develop new capabilities for conducting our own strategic deception operations. The president nodded slowly. You're talking about fundamentally changing how we approach national security. Yes, sir. The threats we're facing require us to think differently about protection and response. Our adversaries aren't just trying to steal our secrets. They're trying to understand our society well enough to manipulate it. We need to develop the capability to do the same to them. Over the following months, Sarah's recommendations were implemented through a series of classified presidential directives. The Counterintelligence Division was expanded into a new agency with broader authorities and significantly increased resources. Sarah was appointed as the first Director of Strategic Counterintelligence, with a mandate to protect American society from foreign manipulation, while developing offensive capabilities for strategic deception. The Webb case, which had begun as a simple investigation into compromised military operations, had evolved into a complete transformation of American counterintelligence capabilities. Sarah's experience as a victim of false accusations had given her unique insights into the vulnerabilities of trust-based systems, and she had used those insights to build defenses that protected not just classified information, but the integrity of American institutions themselves. As she returned to her office that evening, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 4 years ago, she had been a mid-level intelligence officer facing accusations of treason. Now she was responsible for protecting the entire nation from foreign manipulation and deception. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Rodriguez, who had become one of her most trusted deputies. New pattern detected in social media influence operations. Looks like our adversaries are adapting to our defensive measures. Sarah smiled as she typed her response. Schedule a briefing for tomorrow morning. The game continues. The work would never truly be finished. As American counterintelligence capabilities improved, foreign intelligence services would develop new techniques and new approaches. The battle for information supremacy was ongoing, a constant chess match between deception and detection, manipulation and resistance. But Sarah Chen had proven that even the most sophisticated espionage operations could be turned against their creators. The accused spy had become the master spy hunter, and America was safer because of her transformation. The hunt for truth would continue, and Sarah would be leading it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.